Today we have Heath Williams, who is a rehab specialist, and he operates in Melbourne as an osteopath, but also has a background in strength and conditioning and integrates the two between strength training and his allied health and rehab. So welcome, Heath, to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me along, Adam. I'm super excited to be here. I've listened to a few podcasts already, and it seems like you've had some great speakers, so hopefully I can live up to that for you.
Yeah, no doubt you will. So just for the listeners, for people that might not have come across your work before or been into your practice, can you just give us a brief history on your career, how you got started, natural progressions, which has obviously led you to where you are today?
Yep, no worries at all. So I've had a pretty mixed background. I sort of fell into the world of osteopathy, and that's what I sort of started studying as an 18-year-old. And whilst going through university, which is a sort of a 5-year sort of undergrad and master's degree, I ended up working as a PT. And so that sort of is probably the place where I started to really sort of love the idea of, the body, how it moves, and then sort of helping people. Since then, or upon graduation, I sort of took a chance and opened up my own business up in regional Victoria, which is sort of northern parts of a couple of hours from Melbourne. And did that for a good 18 months before I got the travel bug. And so I ended up going overseas and spending some time in Sweden and the UK, where I worked as an osteopath, and got the opportunity to sort of spend time with some great practitioners and health professionals. And that's where I suppose I went to one of their FitPro conventions over there, and that's where I got introduced and spent some time listening to the likes of Gary Gray and obviously Paul Chek and Charles Poliquin and these likes, and obviously they're all quite diverse, and that got me more motivated and interested in terms of using exercise for not just strength and conditioning, but also just health and well-being. Yeah. So that's pretty much that journey. And then so upon returning to coming back home, I thought, well, how can I integrate the two? So I ended up sort of starting my own practice here in Melbourne. And these days I'm sort of in practice a good 3 or 4 days a week, where I'm sort of either working with patients that got an injury sort of status, or I'm working with clients that are wanting to just get more out of themselves in terms of just overall health and well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, and so just touch on your qualifications. On your email signature, there's a list that goes for just about ever in terms of your qualifications. You've obviously spent a lot of time and money on doing those courses, but obviously you're someone who implements them as well. But can you just also just give us a quick rundown of the certifications, but also the ones that you perhaps use the most in your assessments and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, no worries. So probably the key ones that I feel like have really implemented and had a big impact on my practice are having done the strength and conditioning course through the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association, so having done level 1 and 2. That has been fantastic. The FMS and SFMA models, which are from your functional movement systems, which has sort of been come out of the US, and then also I've done a few courses by the Gray Institute, which is a lot around functional movement and how the body moves. So they're probably the key sort of ones that have influenced me the most in terms of my everyday practice.
Yeah. And who were those sort of early guys? You mentioned obviously a few people before, Paul Chek, Gary Gray, Gray Cook, those sort of guys. Obviously they're like your big name guys, but was there someone specifically within arm's reach that you were sort of working with and mentoring you initially that you sort of looked up to and thought, oh, this is the person that I want to sort of emulate in my business?
In the world of osteopathy, there's not really many osteopaths that sort of have a real exercise background, or not when I sort of graduated anyway. So I more looked outside of my profession to other professions and sort of were inspired by those people. So the likes of those guys, the likes of other sort of practitioners or health professionals is where I sort of look to learn and then try to bring that into my practice.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. And so when you initially see a client and you're working, obviously you're usually treating people with some sort of condition or pathology that you have to treat. What is the process that you take people through, but also the integration post that, and then sort of integrating back into the realms of your strength certifications and that sort of those applications that you have as well.
Yeah, definitely. So regardless of whether or not an individual's got an injury or no injury, I see exercise as a big part of their treatment moving forward. Obviously, I want to get an understanding around obviously what their goals are and what they're looking to sort of achieve, and that might well be just sort of pain reduction, but many people want to improve day-to-day function. So I suppose from a consultation point of view, patient comes in, sit down, listen to their story, get a sense of what drives them, what their goals are, and depending on where they're at with their injury, it might well be some manual therapy, but then quickly moving that person from table-based approach to more of an active intervention. So that'll be getting those individuals doing regular stretching, mobility, strength work, and that'll be all very relevant and specific to their goals. So, and that could be anyone from your 15-year-old teenager who's your next wannabe athlete to your 75-year-old grandma who just wants to be able to get down on the floor and sort of be able to pick up her grandkids and play with them and that sort of stuff. So it's very much focused to them and their particular sort of goals to get the most out of it.
Yeah. And what are the sort of common areas that I guess you work with by default? Like what are the most common pathologies that you deal with in treatment?
Primarily, it's all musculoskeletal in origin, but I suppose what we're sort of known for with our practice is spinal-based pathology, which just is going to be some of your non-specific mechanical low back pain, as well as then your shoulder, knee and hips sporting type complaints. So it's a bit of a mix, and it's probably more depending on the age of the person, then also their particular exercise habits and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and obviously because you do have that strength and conditioning background, you're probably more likely to see the likes of myself, strength and conditioning coaches and PTs. Is that would you say that's a fair statement?
It's a very fair statement. Generally, those that are in that sort of space want to come to see someone like myself because we have an understanding of what they do and what they want to do and what they like to do, and so I've got a lot of powerlifters, a lot of bodybuilders, a lot of just strength coaches, PTs, calisthenics, gymnastics-based PTs. So pretty much the whole gamut. CrossFitters, yeah. Anyone that loves movement, sort of that has an injury, often finds their way to our clinic if they're looking for someone that has an interest in that.
Yeah, and I think that's what I've identified with your work, and having seen you before, is the fact that you obviously do prescribe strength and conditioning into the rehab model, but it's often that in the past I've referred to different rehab practitioners and they've said to them, you shouldn't be doing X, Y, Z, and they don't really have a grasp of what a strength and conditioning coach might do. Do you see a lot of
totally
that? Do you see a lot of that with the people that you work with, or obviously you do a little bit of teaching as well, but do you see that as well?
Certainly, probably the biggest. Sorry, that's just a helicopter flying over. The biggest thing that I probably see with a lot of practitioners that don't have an area of interest in exercise and movement and well-being is that they're telling people to stop, and stop means deconditioning. Stop is not thinking about working around the injury, keeping that person moving, because they're not looking potentially at that person as a whole. So. Obviously, how one feels about themselves and how they're moving and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis is really important to mental health and well-being. And a big part of what we do is to try and keep that person moving. And we get lots of referrals from the likes of professionals like yourself, just because we are not those people that are saying stop. And I think that's too often the go-to sort of answer if there's a lack of understanding of how to work around that complaint. Yeah.
And so when you see, because you teach, do you still teach at Victoria University?
I still teach, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm teaching the osteopathic students in exercise rehab at Vic Uni.
Yeah, and so with those certifications and qualifications, Do you feel that when they come out of those tertiary environments, that there's a clinical aspect of it that they do? Do you feel that there's something missing with them if they don't get paired up and get some experience in the side that you've been exposed to as well?
Yep, definitely. I suppose the good thing now is that they're exposed to it, so they're aware of it. They know the benefits of it and where to go to it. Obviously, within a postgrad sort of course, it's limited in terms of what you can teach them. But certainly, they're only sort of really just scraping around the edges of that sort of stuff. So therefore, their knowledge base is quite limited, and for them, they need to go off and spend more time learning beyond that sort of, sort of postgrad level of study that they're sort of completing.
Yeah, and if you were to sort of rewrite the I guess the content, what would you direct them into? Would it be more the clinical side? Would you point? I guess it's what would you change if you could change something about it?
I suppose, and again, this is commonly said everywhere, it's probably trying to bridge that gap from a clinical sort of scenario, someone in pain, to that return to performance, or to that return to wanting to do just whatever their goals are or their activities of daily living. So there's that massive divide between injury and where they want to be, and it's probably really looking at educating practitioners to be able to sort of step in there and be able to have an active role within that. And if they are not confident, or if it's not within their scope, then at least refer out to professionals like yourself so that we can work together to help that person to get there. And I think that's probably the other big sort of key thing that I see. A lot of practitioners like to work in silos, and they're just sort of thinking they'll fix all, but it's about getting a team of people around a person to really help that person. So that's probably a big part of what I'd focus on, outside of where the whole pain science thing is. In the past, I suppose, when we think about injuries and pain, there's that idea that pain means stop, we must stop. And what we're starting to learn a lot more about this sort of stuff is that those that have been in pain for some time, exercise and movement and variability in movement is a big part of helping build capacity for that person, and also some resilience to their body and how they move and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And you just mentioned before the word team, if they had a perfect team. If you could put together a perfect team, say, of allied professionals and rehab specialist strength and conditioning, what would that team look like? If you had someone come in with an injury and you wanted to ensure that they were going to be better for the long haul, what would the team be made up of?
In the ideal world, the team would be made up of an allied health professional, be it an osteopath or a physio. You're going to have in there someone who's an exercise phys or a sports science strength and conditioning coach, as well as then potentially a sports doc if needed. That'd be the ideal world. Yeah. Just because we can't be good at everything. We can be good at components, and within that, obviously, I would look at it as being the sports doc might help with the diagnosis and pain. You've got the osteopath or physio doing treatment with early rehab intervention, and then handballing on to the likes of yourself to be able to really sort of see that person through to sort of performance-based sort of outcomes. So that to me is the perfect team. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's the difference? Just, I might be a little bit ignorant in this, but in the terms of treatment processes, the difference between a physiotherapist and an osteotherapist, what are the main differences?
Yeah, probably like if we think about in Australia, an osteopath is, so depending on where your audience is coming from, an osteopath in Australia is very similar to an osteopath in the UK. In America, very different. These days, to be honest with you, I actually don't think there's a great deal. If you've got a good osteopath and a good physio, they're the same. And it's more about the person you're seeing, not necessarily the profession. Historically, you might sort of argue that the physio is perhaps more exercise-based and perhaps local to the injury, whereas an osteopath is perhaps looking at the body a bit more holistically, is a bit more manual therapy-based. However, I'm seeing a mishmash of this sort of everyone's doing bits of everything these days, and so therefore we all know how to apply techniques and that sort of stuff. And obviously, the principles is what maybe differentiates us. But it's these days it's about the person you see, not necessarily the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good answer. I think there's obviously PTs and strength coaches as well that sort of dip their toe in the rehab model as well. Whether they do it to the level that you would, obviously not with all the qualifications, but obviously it is a bit of a grey area for everyone.
Yeah, and that's the same in our profession when it comes to S&C stuff. So I know my limits, and then when it's hit that point, you're off to see people that are much better than I am.
Yeah, yeah. So if just changing gears, if you started working with someone today and they had no injury complaints but wanted to start strength training, what sort of screens would you give them to I guess identify structural limitations, mobility issues? What would your screen look like?
Okay, so yeah, for thinking biomechanical, structural sort of presentation, I have a bit of a hybrid model. I've dabbled in just being strict FMS and strict SFMA. However, I've moved away from that and now combine some of those assessment protocols with some learnt from the likes of Kelvin Giles and his movement dynamics approach, which is more looking at just different movements again with the likes of some of your Gary Gray. So essentially we're looking at fundamental movement patterns of squat, lunge, pull, push, press, as well as then breaking that down and looking at bracing strategies, looking at how the body moves to try and get an awareness. Within that though, that will then maybe break out into more orthopedic or traditional osteo or physio type assessments to see if there is any sort of underlying pathology.
Yeah. And you spoke about just before bracing strategies. I'd just like to dig deep on that because obviously everyone's got a differing opinion on that, whether you're doing abdominal hollowing or bracing. What would you teach if someone wanted to get under the bar and lift a bit of weight?
Okay, so if we're thinking an individual who's going to be pushing reps of 1 through to 5 reps of near maximal loads, bracing to me is integral. So that will be the pushing out of the stomach, I suppose, in essence, to create that torso stiffness so that one can maintain that good integrity there so they don't collapse under the bar effectively. Yeah. There's the breath holding component to that within the rep that you're doing. However, that is very much specific to the maximal loading sort of individuals. For your Joe Blow who's just going to be lifting sub-maximal loads, there's an element of that, but it's not perhaps as focused as much. It's really depending on their goal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And in terms of in the last few years, just following some more of the calisthenics and gymnastics work, they're obviously teaching a little bit more of the flexed spinal positions. You've got like things like Jefferson curl, and I think a lot of Gary Gray's work, he's doing flexion and rotation with his movements. Obviously, in the traditional way, or I was taught probably 15 years ago, was like never ever bend the lower back. No, flexion and rotation is bad. Could you perhaps just talk a little bit about, I guess, how it's evolved in the last perhaps maybe 10 years and who would benefit from doing those types of movements and who should clearly stay away from doing that sort of stuff?
Yeah, okay. So generally speaking, if there's no serious pathology, everyone should be doing some of that stuff to some degree. Obviously, we're going to be doing components of that unloaded, and I suppose if we're moving to a loaded scenario of doing that, with the Jefferson curl, for example, then the individual, obviously, I wouldn't be recommending them doing that if they're in an acute state. It also comes down to, I suppose, subgrouping the person. So if someone's got a history of low back sort of disc bulge with posterior lateral disc bulge, going to put pressure on the nerve, I would be very mindful of loading someone like that with flexion. And if I was to do that, we're going to start very sort of, we're going to start at the most basic regressed position we can, and then perhaps start to introduce more of that. And that may never evolve to loading. It might be just introducing flexion. That whole sort of idea that you talked about before, that is what drives fear in people. And those sort of, you shouldn't flex your spine, you should never deadlift if you've got a bad back, that sort of stuff, that is fear inducing. And I think that's a big part of the industry that I work in and you work in. And I think if we can sort of move away from that, because a lot of that stuff is myths out there and that sort of stuff. And so that's not to say, it's not good for everyone or it's not bad for everyone. That's a generalization, and it is about picking who you should do that with. But certainly I don't think we should not do anything. We shouldn't avoid anything really unless there's a real reason.
Yeah. How would you approach that if you had someone who had been taught that, don't put your knees in front of your toes when you squat, or any of those cliche techniques that we were told we had to do years and years ago? How would you do that, just from a coaching point of view, and to break it down for them without making them feel like an idiot?
No. I always ask them why they're doing that and what their beliefs are around that. And obviously, depending on where their belief system is with that, I will try to at least give them my educated sort of advice around why that might not be the case, and then let them explore and do that themselves to sort of to reinforce that actually it is safe, it is okay to do that sort of stuff. And then hopefully through that experiential side of it and a better understanding, they're sort of not going to be focusing so much on not doing that.
Yeah. Have you come across some stupid? Have you got any potential stories where you've had people come to you and say some interesting things?
I've had people exactly as you've said there. I shouldn't squat with my knees over my toes. I've been told to never flex my spine ever in anything that I'm doing, and that sort of stuff. So here they are trying to keep a sort of an upright trunk position in all things they're doing. All of those sort of silly things, but that's often driven by fear, though, and perhaps maybe having read something off Google, maybe out of some magazine or online magazine that's sort of not necessarily relevant to them. So that happens on a daily basis, to be honest.
Yeah.
So it's a bit. Oh, sorry. It's a bit like saying someone's back's out and they've slipped their disc and that sort of stuff. That's the same thing in our profession. You've got this garbage going on out there. It's trying to break down those sort of poor communication styles to the patient and sort of understanding around it. Yeah.
And what I've found a lot with people that I've worked with is that they'll often identify the pain with the specific thing that was happening at the time that the pain first occurred. But I always try and explain to them it's often the straw that broke the camel's back. It's not necessarily because you went to pick up that biro on the floor or tied your shoelaces, like they're normal activities that they should be doing, but they equate that and sometimes I guess frame an exercise that might not have been guilty of that. What are the specific exercises that you would treat mostly that people are doing incorrectly that would cause issues, whether it's a shoulder or a lower back?
So what exercises? So a lot of the time it could be any exercise. It might just be, I think about it as being maybe a technique-based issue, a loading issue, and that might be sort of that overloading too soon, or a poor programming issue, or a lack of movement prep and recovery around that. It could be, it's multifactorial, I think.
Yeah.
But from a exercises specific, common ones that I'm seeing all the time, squats and deadlifts are going to be definitely potentially opening up opportunities for low back and hip issues.
Yeah.
Lots of military press or a poorly done bench press is another big one. Is in the space that I'm working in, because I'm seeing a lot of people doing these things. They're probably the most common ones within the patient base that I'm seeing. Yeah.
Kettlebell swings as well.
You can definitely. Most of the guys that I see that are in the kettlebells have done the likes of a Strong First or an RKC sort of background, so they're good. Yeah, so but if they're coming from maybe a generic large chain fitness center and they've read a magazine, then luckily they're never really dabbling in a weight that's actually going to have a training effect for them, but it's probably not going to put them at risk either. So if they were dabbling in a heavier weight, then I reckon that's probably opening up an opportunity.
Yeah. And what would you say, what are the most common areas of restriction in terms of a mobility standpoint that you would see? You spoke about bench press before, if they're not executing it with good technique or they're not in the right position. What areas, I mean, you don't have to specifically answer about the bench press, but just, I guess, about the common ones that we spoke about there.
Yep. My big three regions or go-tos in anyone that's training regularly is foot and ankle, it's hip, it's thoracic, spine, shoulder girdle. Yeah. They're your primary areas that require good mobility. If they're gunked up and they're not moving well, then it's going to be the knee that cops it, the low back, the neck. So from an assessment and review of that, they've got to be clear, or I've got to be having someone moving towards improving that. Otherwise, that person potentially hasn't earned the right to do certain exercises.
Yeah. Okay. And so if they don't address that issue, it'll present in a different area. So, for example, if you're assessing the ankle, it not necessarily will come from the ankle in terms of their pathology after that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, biomechanical. Let's take a anterior knee pain. So runner's knee, patellofemoral, that kneecap issue stuff. That's clinically where the symptoms are. But a big part of that's probably coming from a lack of hip strength, potentially through glute med, glute max, etc. Or it might be because there's a lack of mobility in the ankle, and it's often how that's interacting and then overloading and asking those tissues around the knee that then ends up resulting in some pain sort of response and that sort of stuff. So very, very common.
Yeah. And so what would a preventative sort of method of those, I guess, for an overuse for runners, but obviously particularly for people who are doing strength and conditioning, if you had to, I know it's very hard because obviously what you do is very specific to the individual you're seeing, but if you had to give a shotgun approach, and if someone was listening to this and they wanted to sort of, I guess, bulletproof their body before doing those activities, where should they, and if it's someone who's sitting behind a desk, I guess would be, I guess, most of the population as well?
Yeah, pretty much. Anyone that's training, again, they've got to be doing some ankle mobs, which is going to be addressing the soft tissues, the calf, the soleus. It could be foam rolling, stretching. They need to be doing some knee to wall ankle mobility work, or potentially some banded ankle mobs. Moving into the hip, we need to be looking at the hip flexors, so opening up through the iliopsoas there, looking at the glutes, so stretching out the glutes. I suppose then looking at the shoulder girdle and thoracics, looking at extension and rotation through the thoracic spine. That could be some foam rolling through the thoracic spine. It could be then progressing into some open book exercises or rotational exercises. So pretty much I would incorporate key things like that for everyone within their movement prep typically, as a way to just blanket assess and then identify within their own little mini assessment when they're doing their movement prep. Is there an issue there? If so, I've got to go after that a bit more. And then if it's good, then we'll move through that and move on to the next stuff. Yeah. So that's probably the key things I'll go after.
How long should someone spend, if providing they're not in pain or have got some deep sort of pathology, how much time should someone spend doing like prehab before or movement prep before they're doing their exercise routine, where if it's a run or if it's a weight training session?
I suppose probably the correct, probably a good answer is long enough to get the body warmed up and ready to go. And for each person, that's going to be different. But I suppose if you're going to be spending 50 minutes doing it's like strength work, I'd be looking at 10, 15 minutes beforehand, which needs to incorporate. And again, I sort of borrow some of those concepts from Mike Boyle and doing some maybe myofascial release into some static stretching, into some dynamic stretching or activation techniques, and then sort of priming the body to do that exercise they're going to be doing.
Yeah.
So if you've got a little system in place, hopefully that can be compacted into 10, 15 minutes. What I see, though, is that most people never really move out of movement prep, and they spend more time in that than they do training. And that's probably another common thing that I see with lots of people presenting to the practice that I work in.
Yeah. How would you treat someone with an overuse injury if they've got faulty mechanics on, whether it's a push or a press, and they're building up tightnesses in the wrong areas? Say it's like a wrist flexor is a common one that I see a lot of people presenting with elbow pain, and obviously they're doing pretty much everything in the gym. Is you're relying on your grip strength. What are some ways or strategies specifically to I guess release that area through there and I guess identify? I guess it's hard to identify, but in terms of how would you treat someone with something like that?
So someone who's presenting with forearm pain from perhaps overtraining, technique related. Yep. Yeah. I suppose firstly, let's show us what you're doing. Can I have a look at your technique first? Make sure that's pretty tidy. Number two, it will be looking at introducing some movement prep, which might involve some local wrist flexion and extension mobility exercises. Maybe some self-massage at home. And then I'm looking up at that shoulder girdle, though. So can they open up through their pec, get their shoulder back? Do they have requisite external rotation, appropriate internal rotation? And then looking at that thoracic rotation, thoracic extension. So it all comes back to this girdle in terms of that stuff. But training load is probably the key one. Probably deloading that person to take away that irritation, let things settle is a big part of that process too. Yeah.
Oh, it's some good advice. I was actually selfishly asking that one more about myself. It's something I've built up. But anyway, we'll hopefully someone else has got that out there.
Yeah, probably the best thing is it doesn't mean you can't do unilateral chest work and pull work. So work on that whilst you're obviously addressing your problematic side. Yeah.
And what, I guess, just common mistakes that you see in strength training, do you see any, the people coming to see you, what are the common areas that people need work and need a little bit more advice in?
So we're talking general public, sort of just love hitting the gym up themselves. Firstly, it'll be their program. There's often a very big imbalance anterior to posterior. I typically will see a ratio of 1-to-1 chest to back, front, and then front to back in the lower body. I'm a big believer of sort of looking at a 2-to-1 ratio of back to chest work and posterior chain glute ham to anterior work. So just changing that up in terms of exercise sets, reps, etc. That's probably a massive one. Other common issues that I might see are either they're underloading or overloading too quickly. It's probably more often underloading, and they're not having any structure within their program. So they just turn up, do the same thing each week, have done for the last 8 months, and they're like, why am I not getting better? They're not sticking to that progressive overload principle and that adaptation principle. So I'm often really playing around with that side of things. So they're probably the key things anyway.
Yeah, that's some good advice. Now, I know you're a parent, so I think you've got a couple of kids.
Yep, I've got two. I've got a almost 4-year-old and a 11-month-year-old at the moment, so pretty busy.
Yeah. So obviously being a parent, what sage advice would you give to, I guess, other parents? What would you do, or what do you do for your children, just ensuring they're going to, I guess, thrive and prevent from, I guess, future injuries, but also set them up for success with their body?
Yep. Okay. I suppose at that age, I firstly just encourage fun, and if it's moving and fun, that's number one principle. Number two that I've really focused on, and I suppose I'm just wanting them to explore, and especially my oldest anyway, not be the best at anything, but just do bits of everything. And that might be, let's kick the football, let's maybe walk on a balance beam, let's see if we can climb up there. So just really looking at all those fundamental things, and probably the playgrounds where you see that the most. So they're so well developed, those playgrounds, for kids to be able to explore and do all those movements, really have them spend time in that sort of space. So really just sort of fostering all of that activity, and try to limit screen time so it doesn't then obviously impact on creativity and movement and that sort of stuff, because they're all going hand in hand. So that's sort of, I've been sort of learning that now. I've been sort of slowly starting to spend time with my son Archie around sort of learning to coordinate some movements of hitting a ball and kicking a ball and that sort of stuff. So that's been fun looking at that from I suppose a developmental thing. And that's been like super fun to learn that and sort of get a sense of how I might coach an adult is very different to coaching a child and that sort of stuff. So not sort of, I suppose just letting them explore it and have fun with that stuff, and reinforce positive sort of stuff around there. Yeah,
well, that's some good advice. Obviously, you want to keep it fun, and obviously that's going to keep them more engaged in what they're doing with you. What age would you? I mean, I guess it's dependent on your child and their interest, but what age would you look into perhaps strength training, whether it's body weights or using implement tools?
Well, I've already started. So, if I'm doing a workout, then I've got Archie out there sort of trying to copy and that sort of stuff. So if I'm going to be doing a push-up, can you get down there and give that a go? If I'm doing a squat, can you show me? If I'm doing a lunge, we'll do it on a balance beam, and he's sort of doing some walking along that. Luckily enough, too, at the gym that I go to, we're allowed to bring our kids into the gym. So I've brought Archie into the gym a few times, and I'll do a set of something and he'll do a set of something. Obviously, it's not loaded stuff, but it's more fun and that sort of stuff. So just getting him used to seeing other people exercise, seeing what I do, so I can role model that well for him.
Yeah. How old is Archie? Just out of interest.
He'll be 4 in July.
Okay, so that's early. That's obviously he's looking up to you as a dad, and he wants to do what you're doing.
Yeah, obviously, if we're talking more structured strength training and that sort of stuff, I'd probably look at probably primary school, just starting to, and it's going to be all body weight stuff. Just looking at regressed versions of body weight stuff again. Kelvin Giles, I went to a course by him once here in Melbourne, and he is amazing in terms of what he does and what he's done in the UK, where he's introduced what they call this 5 in 5. You do 5 exercises in 5 minutes at different points in the day, and it's about teaching coordination. It's about teaching commitment. It's also, from an outcome point of view, they've looked at the research there, and it shows that they've had actually better academic results and better self-esteem components with these kids that are doing this stuff regularly. So it's not just the physical attributes, it's all the sort of psychosocial components that go with it, I think, and hence why I'm a big believer in movement and children and that sort of stuff. Yeah, well, that's some good advice, and no doubt we've got some parents listening, so hopefully they can take some of that advice on board. Now, just shifting gears a little bit, I guess you've been in the industry for, I think it was 15 or maybe even longer in terms of years. Close, 2003. So since then. Yeah, so it's a long time, and obviously over the years, you would have changed your approach to certain things, and how you treat someone now is not necessarily how you would have treated them in 2003. What would, if you're looking back now, what I guess are some of the things that you sort of cringe at and think, why was I doing that? Obviously you didn't know at the time, but I guess what have you learnt from I guess those mistakes? I suppose when I first started, I thought I could fix everything and everyone, and that's just probably freshly getting out of uni, having all this knowledge and that sort of stuff. You're like, okay, we can sort everything out. And sort of probably the big thing that I've learnt since then is that I'm not going to fix everyone and everything. And so it's about sort of getting a sense of who I can help and why, and when they're ready to be helped if need be, and that sort of stuff. That's probably a massive thing that I've learned. Yeah. since graduating and since sort of spending a bit more time in this sort of profession.
Yeah, but are there any specific like treatments or assessments that you think, oh, that was such a big waste of time for me to go down that path?
I've probably moved away from just all passive modalities. So when you first had seen myself, you would have laid on the treatment table for probably the majority, 95% of the consult. These days, it's a lot less of that because of, I suppose, the benefits of some of those more active approaches and that sort of stuff. I feel like they yield better long-term results. They're not just looking at short-term fix for that person. So that's probably a big thing. And that within that falls the context of joint manipulation, soft tissue, stretching, all those things. It's not just on the table. It's more of an interaction between patient and practitioner and movement and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So when I saw you were very intuitive, very good, and you obviously identified the issue that I had and was able to fix me within, I think it was like 2 sessions, and gave me some constructive things to work on. How many sessions usually does it take when you're saying, so obviously it's case by case, but I guess on average to get someone to where you want them to be?
Yeah, okay. I suppose let's talk an acute scenario. If it's an acute, it's typically less sessions if we're trying to get them out of pain. And that could range anywhere between 1, 2, and 4 or 5 or a few more. But if it's something more chronic, it's long-standing, then typically it will be probably quite a number of sessions, not in a short period of time, but over an extended period of time, moving that person through that process of hands-on through to them actively managing their problem. So it is a tough one to answer because not too low backs are never the same. You could have the same diagnosis on MRI, and yet you've got 2 different people with 2 different backgrounds, and you could give the same treatment intervention and they totally react differently. So it also comes down to you're a motivated individual. So obviously I know if I'm going to give you stuff, you're going to do that. And so you're probably much easier to prescribe things, exercises to, because I know you're going to get involved and you're actively wanting to get better. And so for those people that aren't that way inclined, it may well be a longer road for those people.
Yeah, that's a good answer. But I think what's powerful and with you is you want them to get out, and it's not about you just ticking over the sessions and getting them to coming back and paying you. It's sort of more about them actually getting out there. How you just spoke about it before. I'm just really interested to know, because just from my coaching as well and getting people to do things when they're away from the gym, are there any little, I guess, tricks or habit creations that you get people, obviously not giving them too much stuff to work on initially if you know that they're not motivated, but I guess how do you attack it from a coaching point of view to get someone to do something?
Okay. That's the hard part. So
it's probably the hardest.
Getting someone to do something. Yep, for sure. So firstly, I will always ask them, what's the likelihood of them doing some exercise, and then how ready are they to? So getting a sense of likelihood and readiness for it. So it's that sort of, I suppose, change in behaviour. But it's probably really thinking about tapping into what drives and motivates that person. What are their goals? What are their outcomes that they want? And try and relate what I'm prescribing to that, and show them that that's going to help them move towards those goals. So it's not about me telling them they need to do that because that's going to be good because it's going to loosen off their hip flexor. That doesn't mean anything to them. It's more about, okay, if you do this a bit more, it's really trying to tap into their psyche around that sort of stuff. And then obviously starting with small amounts and building on success, showing them that it can be successful. It's not so onerous on them, making it fun. So it's not just a menial task they've got to do each day for 30 minutes, and sort of keeping it quick and easy for them to be able to do on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I guess if you've got someone who's in acute pain or chronic pain and they have been for years, they're going to be more inclined to try everything and to do it, I guess.
But very Potentially, they might be, definitely. And then there might be those that are so fearful of doing anything, they don't want to actually move. And that can be a challenge in itself. But yeah, certainly you can tell who those are motivated. Pretty much before I see anyone that comes into my practice now, I'll send out a questionnaire. What do you want to get out of the consult? What do you want to walk away with? What are your goals? So I can sort of start preparing before I see that person to get into that headspace and start trying to help them as much as I can when they come in.
Yeah, awesome. What are some current things that you're learning? I know obviously you're an avid reader and learner, someone's always doing courses. What currently are you learning and interested in?
Exactly what you're just talking about right now. I'm booked to do another level of motivational interviewing, just sort of a course around trying to communicate with clients to tap into what motivates them. Yeah. I've recently did a course with the Wellness Coaching Australia, which was sort of, again, tapping into goal setting and behaviour change and that sort of stuff. So that's a big one at the moment. Outside of the technical stuff too. So I sort of love doing all that strength and conditioning technical stuff also. So I sort of juggle between the two.
Yeah. And what specific ones are you doing in terms of are there courses that you're doing in the client-centered sort of interviewing?
I'm doing a motivational interviewing course with Helen Mentha, who's like a leading psychologist here in Melbourne, who runs postgrad courses in that. The other one that I had done just recently last year was the Wellness Coaching Australia course, which is is pretty much suitable for everyone. Yeah. And it's all about sort of goal setting and moving on with life and that sort of stuff. And then there's all that sort of podcasts that you can listen to and that sort of stuff. I'm an avid podcast listener and that sort of stuff. So I'm tapping into lots of different podcasts here and there.
Yeah. A book that I read, I don't know whether you've read, probably would have, is by Dr. Roy Sugarman on client-centered training, and it's on that sort of motivational interviewing. It's probably one of the big sort of game-changing books that I read a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I actually haven't read that yet, so I might add that to my list.
Yeah, it's awesome book, and he comes from a science background, so I love the way he writes, but he also sort of connects, and he has a lot of case studies in that. So it was probably one of the better books that I've read in the last couple of years. But he's got a lot of stuff online. He worked with Athletes Performance, or it's now called Exos, but he's got a lot of good stuff on that. But just something that I'm always sort of interested in learning is obviously how to get them to do things when I'm not there, because as you know that's the key for unlocking the results.
Yep, totally, and it's funny. Sometimes I reckon sometimes people get there quickly. Sometimes you want to just smack someone over the head and get them there, and then others just take time to get there, don't they? So it's got to be having to be patient too. Sometimes I think is the hard part. Yeah,
exactly. So I've read just in some of your qualifications that you do ergonomic assessments in workplaces. Can you explain what this entails and what I guess some cheats and ways that people can set themselves up in their desks and at their office?
Yep. So I have another business that sort of focuses on office and manual handling sort of training, and a lot of that's around education. Biggest tip that I can give anyone that works in an office is move. We're becoming the world's becoming so particular these days and efficient that we now no longer move. And I think, and you've probably seen that over in Dubai, there's all those articles talking about how sitting's the new smoking and all the chronic health diseases that come with that sort of stuff. So move more often. And that might be, if you're on the phone, stand up. If you're reading a hard copy document, stand up. Half fill your glass of water so you're getting up more regularly to fill your water and that sort of stuff. So really, one interesting statistic is that if you're sitting 8 hours of the day and you go to do an hour's exercise at the end of the day, you're actually health-wise better off moving more regularly throughout the day, than you are potentially of doing that hour's exercise at the end of the day, because the simple fact is, whilst you burnt calories and that sort of stuff, that regular movement throughout the day is better for your whole cardiovascular system than perhaps just doing that 1 hour and having sat for 8 hours all day.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that makes sense. I guess you can be highly sedentary and still, go to the gym 1 hour a day, but I guess if you're still sitting there for 16 hours, you're adapting to the chair, not the exercise equipment you're on for only 45 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, and if you're hitting the gym after having sat all for 8 hours a day and you've been slumping and you're going to start deadlifting or squatting at near maximal loads, and your back is you're walking on a tightrope there potentially, I reckon.
Yeah.
So moving is good.
Yeah. Any applications that you'd recommend? Are there any apps or things that people could put on their desktop or reminders?
Yep, you've got if you've got an iPhone like I do, you've got a whole bunch of different apps you might want to go and use. You could download your VeriDesk app if you've got a sit-stand desk, which is where things are moving towards now, which will remind you and pop up and say sit-stand, and you will set those parameters. Office break and a variety of other stretch-based ones where they'll pop up on the screen and give you a reminder to say move or take a break and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
They're probably any of those types of things. It could be as simple as using your calendar system on your computer to set a break reminder.
Yeah.
They're probably the key ones.
We spoke about before common areas that people are restricted and tight, and you said ankles are one of the key areas. Now I'm not sure if this is the answer to restricted dorsiflexion, but when you have those desks set up and they've got their feet in sort of that dorsiflexion position where their toes are up, is that advantageous? Yep. Would you recommend someone using one of those footstools? Or is that just a waste of time?
No, a footstool is very relevant, but the only time I'd prescribe a footstool is for the person who is when they're sitting at the right height, so forearms just above desk height, and their feet can't touch the ground. So that worker needs a footrest, because placing your feet on the ground or a footrest will help distribute load, so you're not just loading up your spine. You're sharing the load through lower limb and spine.
Yeah.
And chair, hopefully. Yeah.
And so what is the ideal position for, I guess, if you've got a laptop or a desktop and you're sitting, where should you be? Where are your arms? Where's the screen? Where's your eyes? All that sort of stuff.
I suppose, so in simplistic terms, if you've got a fixed height desk so you can't change the height, you should hopefully have a chair that is adjustable, so up, down, maybe seat pan tilt, backrest up, down, backrest tilt. You're looking for a flat seat pan if we can. We're looking for a backrest that's not 90 degrees, but maybe 100, 110, 120 degrees. Adjust the height for your lumbar support. Then you want to bring your chair up to a height where, when you're in this position, forearms are just above desk height. Okay. That's a simple way. Then when you're looking straight ahead, eye line should fall on the top third of the screen. Should be just beyond arm's length away.
Yeah.
And keyboard and mouse should be in a position where you're not reaching for it, so arms out in front, so relatively by their side in a neutral position. That's sort of generalizations anyway, but will suit most people. If you're working off a laptop, there is no such thing as a good posture.
Yeah, so laptops are bad. I'm in a bit of trouble because that's all I use.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm on here now too also. So I would limit laptop use to 30 minutes. If you're doing any more than 30 minutes a day, plug in a separate keyboard and mouse. Maybe get some books, prop your laptop up, or get like a cheap travel laptop riser, just to try and mimic that sort of better ergonomic setup.
Yeah, well, that's some good advice. I think I probably need to take that, because I do spend a lot of time hunched over the old laptop.
And you're a tall guy, mate, so it's going to be worse.
Yeah. What desk stretches or mobility drills could someone do without looking like an idiot in the office?
Many. It could be as simple as simple shoulder rolls, shoulder shrugs, rolls. Simple, nice and easy. For someone like yourself, it could be as simple as a forearm flexor stretch, because you're getting that tight forearm. Yeah. Forearm extensor stretch, nice easy ones like that. Lots of sort of just arms in and out, externally rotating the shoulders, sitting and twisting, sitting and twisting, neck to the side, neck to the side. Just movement. Movement is key.
Yeah.
And so they're probably nice neck, shoulder, forearm ones to do, spine. But if you can, it'd be nice to get into those hip flexors because they're always tightening up. And it'd be nice to probably get into those glutes because they're always sort of tightening up also.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just something that I see with a lot of strength coaches. There's not a lot of work in the frontal and transverse plane. And so I guess a lot of coaches don't program. So a lot of it's very just sagittal. You're just moving forward. You bench press, deadlift, squat, etc. What type of injuries and risks would you expose yourself if you're not using the frontal and the transverse plane in your programming?
I suppose it comes down to what you do outside of that training, yeah? So if you're a multi-directional sports player and you're just doing sagittal plane and vertical-based stuff, well, firstly, you need that agility and movement ability to change direction, be it frontal plane side to side or rotational work. So I suppose from a training perspective, you want to be incorporating movements that might be undertaken in your sport you're doing. If you're the everyday sort of Joe Blow runner who loves running all the time, and again, this is the thing about overuse. Most exercises are sagittal plane or up and down. You're running in the sagittal plane whilst we do move in that frontal plane and transverse plane, but you're just then overloading sagittal plane movement again. And so I think sometimes it's quite nice to implement frontal transverse plane movement. It might be, let's take the lunge for example, lateral lunge, rotational lunge, and that sort of stuff. So just building, I suppose, a variability and capacity around that hip joint and ankle to be able to deal with lots of movement. So you're not constantly having to overload the same tissues. And that probably goes with running on a treadmill versus running outside. Running on a treadmill in a running pattern is going to be more likely to overload stuff versus running on outside on undulating surfaces where your body's always adapting. So I think it's good to have variety in what you're doing in order to not overload the tissues consistently. And that's probably, and that goes with strength training or running or any of these other activities that we do.
Yeah, and that applies to someone who might be, just your office worker as well. You would, just from, if you, in a perfect world, would you advise, say, a strength coach, would you tell them that you're working in the frontal plane and the transverse plane is advisable, just even if it's not someone's specific goal to do those types of movements?
I pretty much everyone should be doing those things, and that could be just part of movement prep, or it might be part of main training program. But there's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be incorporating some of that stuff.
Yeah.
I think we see elite sports, and you read magazines and all those big heavy lifts, and this is they're all those sagittal and vertical plane stuff. Doesn't mean you can't do frontal plane and transverse plane with submaximal loads. When it comes to those big bang for buck exercises like deadlifts and squats and that stuff, then you're going to do what's safest because of the goal of trying to create power and that sort of outcome. But for those more submaximal activities, I think we need to explore more movement in our body.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Now, I'd just like to dig deep on, obviously you're a high performer and someone who's obviously very motivated in what they do. What are some of your habits and routines? And then after that, I'd just like to dig into what you do for your training as well.
Yep. I suppose consistency is key for me. I train every day. And so the definition of training is quite loose. So I went to the gym this morning. Tomorrow I'm flying up to Cairns. So tomorrow I'll probably get 20 minutes to put something in. To me, it's about doing something every day. And that goes for business and say training life and that sort of stuff. It's being consistent is probably the big one. That would be the number one thing that I think in terms of habits that I would fall into. Yeah. I'm pretty pedantic and maybe OCD on stuff, so maybe that's part of the reason why. But it's more about sort of applying yourself to that, and also doing something you enjoy doing. So, like, luckily I love doing this stuff, and if you don't have a passion for it or love it, then it's hard. And so I think you've got to really find what that passion and enjoyment is, and then good things come with that, I feel.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, just looking at your Instagram, you see every day there's a new exercise on there, and it's always good to see what you're doing in the gym and what's latest.
Yeah, well, that was one of my goals. So I don't know how many days ago it was, but I said to myself, I'm going to post one Instagram post every day. Yeah. And that was probably 18 months ago. So that was a business goal that I set and a personal goal. And that's made me, one, it's helped build like a catalogue of exercises. But two, it's actually made me think about having to be more creative in my training. Yeah. Because you can only post so many bench presses and squats and that sort of stuff.
The same movement over and over again.
Yep.
So what you obviously just spoke about before, it's something you're passionate about. What would your advice be to someone who might be just in the beginning of their the osteopathy career, or a strength coach? How would you I guess push them in that direction to find what they might like doing a little bit more?
Firstly, try everything when you're out there to start off with. I'm a big believer in giving things a go, and then find good people that you can learn off. I'm a big believer in surrounding yourself with people that you're able to sort of give to, but also learn off, and that sort of stuff. And so the best stuff I've ever learned is not about going to courses and spending thousands of dollars and that sort of stuff. It's been training at my gym and spending time with all the people within that gym and learning from them, or spending time with my osteo colleagues who are passionate like me and sort of just talking about things and that sort of stuff. So it's really find good people and surround yourself with them. Yeah,
that's great advice. Is there... Just touching on just your own personal habits and routines, we spoke about your training before. What about just from an education point of view? When do you do your learning? But also, are there any other habits and routines? Like, do you do meditation or breathing drills or any sort of relaxing techniques?
Yep. One of my key aims this year was to start yoga, because I've identified I need to spend more time in that restorative state, because life can't be go all the time. So I've actually started implementing a weekly yoga practice and attending sort of a class, but also doing some at home in sort of modified sort of short periods and that sort of stuff. So that's been really good, because that's a weakness of mine, and I want to sort of spend time learning more about that. So that's a big one. And your other question was around...
Just from education and like when do you do your reading and your learning?
And that stuff.
And I guess tips for retention. I've asked this question a lot with previous guests, and everyone's got a different answer. So I love hearing people's way that they study and retain information. Yep.
So most of my learning's done these days on a podcast and listening. By far, I'm not wasting time on the train or driving to work, etc. Or I might attend courses on the weekends. But I suppose you got to tap into your learning style, and for me, that's a combination of see and do. And so if I hear, I need to be able to then see and do and practice and integrate that and start doing it as soon as possible. I'm a big believer of trying to implement what you do, be it in small chunks as soon as you can, to start, familiarising yourself with it and feeling comfortable with it. I'm also a big believer in not overdoing the learning, because if you've got too much going on, you never get to implement anything. And that sort of stuff. So for me, it's about see, do regularly.
That's great. And in terms of spent a lot of time around different coaches, and I find the ones that are really successful are the guys that they might go and do a course on the weekend, but then you see them back in the gym on Monday or Tuesday, and they're like in the trenches doing what they've learnt, and which speaks to what you just spoke about. You need to do, not just learn.
Yep, totally. And learn for then... what works for you. Maybe not everything works, and then taking the good and trying to then form your own ideas around it and that sort of stuff, rather than perhaps just copying. Because I think when you copy, that's not authentic, and people pick up on that. And I think you've got to be authentic in what you're doing and how you understand that, and trying to help people.
Yeah, and I guess it comes down to results. If you learn something, apply it, it doesn't work, then you either got to learn from that rather than just bang your head against a brick wall.
That's right. Yeah, totally.
So we're drawing to the end of the interview. I've got a series of questions that I ask, and so we'll get stuck into those. They don't necessarily have to be quick answers, but just it's a good excuse for people to get to know you a bit better. What's your all-time favorite? It doesn't have to be one of the genres, but it can be a training book, self-help, rehab, or you can pick one from each category.
Okay, is in terms of books or
books? Yeah,
things.
I
books.
Might not have said that.
Okay, let's take exercise. I love Vern Gambetta stuff, so athletic performance and any of the stuff that he does, because he's all about just sort of, or any of multi-directional movement and learning and that sort of thing. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's obviously it's a go-to for lots of people. I really enjoyed that book, got lots out of it. That probably really started me in that space of wanting to try and be better and that sort of thing. And then in terms of sort of just relaxing books, any sort of autobiography. I really liked Andre Agassi's one. I didn't mind Arnie's one too. That was pretty interesting. Seeing his life before he got to America and that sort of stuff. So autobiography is a big one too.
Yeah. Probably 2 of my favourite autobiographies. The Arnold one in particular. Well, when I was reading it, I could literally hear Arnold's voice talking as I was reading it.
Nice one.
What's your all-time favourite movie as well?
I don't really have an all-time favourite movie. No. I'd probably think about. No, I'd probably go for a TV series, probably Seinfeld. Yeah. If you're going to say what can you watch over and over again, I can do that Seinfeld every day of the week.
Yeah. Oh, we're definitely aligned. Yep. I think that's definitely one of my favourites as well. What do you have any quotes that you'd say on a daily basis, or would you say to clients on a regular basis?
Not really. I'm not massive on quotes and that sort of stuff. No one sort of.
Or is there any phrases that you'd say regularly that you catch yourself and you're like, I keep saying that same thing?
Not off the top of my mind, but I do know from teaching, I've been told that I have said one word 200 times in a day once, and I'm trying to think of that word, and it was just a random word. So nothing in particular, but if something gets in my head, I'll probably repeat it a lot.
Yeah. And so what we spoke about before, obviously, for fitness but for teaching your kids, it's all about enjoyment. What would you do for fun aside from strength training and
okay, that's pretty hard to beat, but certainly spending time with my family is number one. Wife and 2 kids and stuff, and then outside of that, travel. So love traveling, and so we're off traveling tomorrow. It's Good Friday here, so tomorrow we're off for 10 days up to northern Queensland. So that'll be nice, just to turn off and recharge. And I try and do that every. Again, probably stolen this again from is it what's his name, Ferris, who says you should have these mini retirements. Yeah, every sort of 3 or 4 months have a mini retirement just to recharge. This is my one coming up tomorrow. Yeah,
and just this is not in part of the rapid fire questions, but we spoke about before. You spoke about business. Is there any sort of people or books that you'd recommend for, I guess, business and how you've sort of created your success? Is there someone you look up to in that area, in that space?
I think the biggest resource that I've tapped into, and this is not deliberate, it just happens organically, is the people I deal with every day. I think you can learn something from everyone, and every patient or every person I'm interacting with, I will try and learn something from them, especially those that have been in business. It doesn't it's all about principles, be it osteo or PT or S&C or any of that stuff. I think it comes back to good principles. It's not about there's little guerrilla marketing techniques you can throw in there, but ultimately it's about having good values and good ethics, and then principles and sticking to that and doing a good job. And I've learned that a lot through my patient base.
Yeah.
And friends and colleagues and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yep.
Now, final rapid fire question. If you could jump in a time machine and give yourself advice, and perhaps that was in 2003 when you first started in your career, what would you tell yourself?
Start training legs more. 100%. I didn't start training legs. I was very much that beach goer. Let's train upper body. So you should be training your lower body much sooner.
Yeah.
100%.
That's good. That's pretty funny. So what's in store for the next 12 months for you? What are you doing? And yeah.
I'm opening a new osteopathic practice with a good mate of mine who's an exercise physiologist here in Melbourne. That will be opening mid-May in the heart of the CBD, corner of Collins Street and Swanston Street. So that's exciting. It's going to be a few treatment rooms, full S&C little setup in there. Our focus is going to be on the things we've talked about today. So that's a big one.
So is that a new practice? Not the one that I came and saw you at?
Yeah, so we're expanding from that.
Okay.
So we're sort of moving into that sort of new location, which will be good. So that's consuming me now, and then outside of that, it's sort of just doing more of what we do at the moment, which is teaching at uni. I get to go up to SCU this year, which is up in northern New South Wales. Get to do some teaching there, and then just sort of really try and sort of trying to keep doing what we're doing well at the moment and try and be a little bit better tomorrow. That's the goal, really.
Yeah, awesome. And finally, where can people find out more and get in contact with yourself or any of your colleagues to book in a consultation?
Best place would be at Principle for Osteopathy. So that's www.principle4osteopathy.com. And you can have a look at our webpage there, or if you're into Instagram or social media, I'm not on many, but Instagram is osteo Heath Principle 4 osteopathy, and you can sort of get a sense of what we do in the practice. I put patients up there as examples of what they're doing, obviously with their permission, and that gives you a bit of a sense of how we work if you're interested in that sort of side of things. Yeah,
no, I'll highly recommend everyone checks out your Instagram, and I'll put it on the show notes so people can click through to that. But just seeing a little bit of inspiration every day of you doing a unique exercise is, everyone should look at it.
Well, that's pretty funny because there's mutual, because I look at yours for inspiration and go, okay, I've got to push harder.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for your time, and thanks for coming on. I'm sure, no doubt, I've got a lot out of this conversation, and I'm sure the listeners will as well. So thanks again for giving up your time to be on here.
No worries, and thanks for having me on, Adam. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you all the best with the podcast moving forward.